Let's just go through this. And I will preface the whole thing by saying I've tried to encapsulate 10-ish years of product management experience in healthcare into like 4 slides, which is, just kind of crazy as I was going through it, doing it. But since today's is a shorter format than what we typically have, given everyone's remote, I figured it'll be a good idea just kind of like do the high level, like 20,000 foot view. And by all means, please ask questions. And even after this session today, I'm open to like reach out to me on Facebook, and I'd be happy to like set up a conversation and start talking about it. Cool. So let's just dive right into it. So what is different about healthcare technologies? And my purpose of this slide is mostly to say as compared to the rest of tech, right? So when I talk about the rest of technology, it's both like mostly consumer applications, or social media applications, or even things like devices and all of that stuff. So what's really different about healthcare technology specifically? And the number one thing that comes to mind is just the level of regulations, patient privacy, compliance, and legal obligations that you have. Historically, over all my experiences in health tech as a product manager, I have usually had about 30% to sometimes even 40% of my roadmap just dedicated to regulatory and compliance and privacy. So, if you're not yet a product manager or you are one, 30% to 40% of your roadmap is a lot. And, in the healthcare technology space, this is table stakes. You got to do this just to even compete. The second thing that's very different about healthcare technology is now, if you look at regular tech, you have your Twilios of the world, you have, Square, you have Stripe, you have all these companies that have done a great job of just like openly allowing consumer applications to dip into APIs and pull data and send it here, and do all that good stuff. Whereas in healthcare technology, it's the opposite. So it's very difficult to acquire healthcare data. And a lot of it is siloed. So for example, I live here in San Francisco. UCSF down the street uses the same system as, let's say, Sutter Health, which is up in Pacific Heights. But those two systems won't talk to each other just because they belong to like different health systems. And then there's all these data privacy issues. And so everything remains siloed and no one really wants to give access to that data. So that's, it's a big restriction of building products in healthcare technology. Then the third thing, which is a lot more interesting, which was actually a revelation for me being at Instacart, which was at its core not a healthcare technology company, was that your business model and how you make money in healthcare does not depend on how many millions of daily or monthly active users you have. And the simple reason for that is when you have, especially here in the United States, when you have a healthcare system that's completely driven by insurance, and you have the payer model where payers actually reimburse a healthcare provider for their services, when health tech comes into the picture, you don't actually really, you don't drive to build a product that, let's say, your 5-year plan is I need 100 million monthly active users, right? So that's not a thing in healthcare technology, which also means it takes away a lot of that consumer emphasis at first pass when you think about it. Top of the funnel. So when you talk about any application, you're talking about number of users who actually get access to it, how many people are going to even see it, how many people are even going to hear of it. So for example, just take Product School, right? Some of you must have just Google searched, hey, I want to learn about product management. You saw an ad about Product School, right? Or you had a friend who did something on Product School, posted on Facebook, you saw it on social media, and now you're looking at it. So that's the top of the funnel in the rest of the world. Whereas in the healthcare system, in healthcare technology, there is no such thing. Like if I want to Google, if I search for, hey, show me my health records from Dr. Smith, I will get nothing. And so the top of your funnel of how as a user you even access any healthcare technology product, it begins at the point of care. So you have to go to a hospital, to an ambulatory clinic, to when you get your blood work done, so on and so forth, to actually even access the product. So it's a very restricted, much smaller top of the funnel than your typical consumer application. And then finally, one of the biggest aspects about healthcare technology is there's always multiple elements when it comes to who your stakeholders are. So when you're building a product in healthcare technology, you're not just building it for the patient. You're also building it for their partners, their families. You're building it for their providers. Like if you have to play in the health technology space, you have to have that provider component. Because if you go to the first bullet point, which is about regulations and compliance, no one will let you credibly play in the healthcare technology space unless you have a plug-in into health systems and providers. Because when it comes to patient safety, patient information, no one really wants to trust it unless you're affiliated with some sort of provider or health system. So that's a very unique set of, and I want to describe this slide as like, these are not just the unique elements about healthcare technology, but if you're a product manager or someone getting into product management and who looks at your typical consumer app or a social media app, these are all constraints which would, if they existed in the social media world, we would not have a Facebook, or we would not have a Twitter or Snapchat, because some of these bullet points would completely kill that business model. So that's the uniqueness about healthcare technology. And I'm going to pause here for a few seconds to see if there's any questions. And if not, I'll continue on and we can do questions in the end.
Gaurav, I guess I have a question. When you talk about health tech products, can you give us some examples so,
Yeah,
you would
totally
understand that better?
Yeah, sure. So, and again, this is a very broad, opening slide as well as presentation. So healthcare technology, there's so many products that span right from, you could be talking about, in the instrumentation space, whether it's how you're innovating when it comes to imaging technologies or when it comes to surgical technologies. So that is one form of healthcare technology products. Another form, and towards the end of this, I actually have a slide on some emerging areas, which is a lot more interesting and consumer driven. But then now you have a lot of apps which are trying to help in healthcare technology. Like you have apps like Mindful, Headspace, which are all which are just talking about mental health and how you handle those conditions. So that's again an example of consumer side of healthcare technology. Then you also have one of the classic and the biggest businesses in healthcare technology is actually around patient data. So if you go to the hospital or you go to a doctor and you get your annual checkup or something, you want to see your test results and you want to see what your blood pressure was, what your other vitals were. So there are I think at least 1,000+ different applications which are some form or the other of patient engagement, where you can log in and actually see all your healthcare information. So there's a massive amount of applications in just that space alone. So these are some areas of healthcare technology products that very broadly I'm referring to. Cool. So, and sorry, I had one more bullet point on there. One of the things that's very different from healthcare technology versus consumer technology is you spend a lot more time building products along edge cases, which is essentially not your core user path, than you do in other industries. So for example, I was at Instacart. Your majority user path is, hey, I get the app, I want to add groceries to my cart, and I want to check out, right? So the majority of the focus as a company at Instacart is on that consumer experience. Now, there are some edge cases where, okay, I live in an area where I can't immediately get the delivery, so now I have to figure out how I'm going to build a product to get that person a delivery. That's an edge case. You don't really, that's not the first order of business when it comes to PMs at Instacart and what they want to solve for. Whereas in healthcare technology, edge cases are basically your that's the meat of your product. Because when you talk about patients, no two patients are alike. Even if you're building an app or a product for a specific type of patient, even amongst them you have multiple branches, and so you kind of have to now start taking into account. Typically in classic product management, you always look at, hey, what is my majority user flow and what's the ones which are edge cases, and you kind of are like, let's deprioritize the edge cases one, and we'll do it in a later release. You can't really do that in healthcare. You kind of have to handle all the cases even in your version one of a product. So it's actually a very heavy sort of mindset in terms of product management. And in addition to all those things, there's this other level of, and over the years, I'm still learning. I by no means I'm the be all of all of this knowledge here, but data formats. So in classical healthcare, you have so many data formats of how information is exchanged. So if you go to a particular hospital, for we're giving a very simple example, you go to a hospital, as soon as you go there and they say, hey, Gaurav Kumar is checked in, there's a certain message that's sent through the back-end systems of healthcare to say Gaurav Kumar is checked in. Now, if you go to another hospital system, that's a completely different data format. So the number one, big challenge that's in healthcare, especially here in the United States, is that no two health systems, no two software systems speak the same language. And hence, if you have to build a product that, let's say, for example, I want to build a product that says, I want to get all my patient records from all the doctors I've ever gone to here in the United States, right? You have to literally build an integration with every single one of those doctor systems. That's the only way to do it. There is no uniform data sharing, and all those formats are different. So that's another aspect of healthcare technology, which is very unique. Whereas if you think about, the non-healthcare space, you have APIs where you can freely, for example, you can just log into Product School, for example, using your Google logins or your LinkedIn or your Facebook, and you have all these APIs and OAuth and all of that can help you just do things very quickly. In healthcare, you do not have that. The other thing that you'll come across is versioning. So even within the same system, so there's a very large healthcare, an electronic medical record system called Epic. So Epic is pretty much one of the market leaders here in the United States. The other one is Cerner. Now, if hospital A is on Epic version 9, I'm just throwing out a number there, and hospital B is on Epic version 10, those two versions will most likely not talk to each other. They might have made some changes, and don't quote me on specifically this particular vendor, but one of the challenges, what you're going to see is systems were built very specific to a certain set of standards, and no one went back to do backwards compatibility. So that did not happen at all in healthcare. So there's that versioning challenge. The other thing that I've seen a lot in healthcare technology is, especially in non-consumer applications. So if you're, let's say, a doctor or a nurse or even a patient who's in your typical, let's say UCSF or Sutter Health, large health systems here in the Bay Area, right? You will be using a system where the user experience is not built with the user in mind. A lot of these systems are very old and archaic. They're built on database structures that were designed in the 70s or the 80s, and they've just built products on top of that. So again, a lot of when I say the buttons on the screen reduce engineering complexity, not the user's complexity, what I mean is the system is designed just so that an engineering problem was solved, not necessarily from the perspective of what a user needs to accomplish. And then finally, time to market. With all